Welcome to Season 3 of the Spotlight series, Don't Just Survive, Thrive. Season 1 was launched to help people through the pandemic by talking to a variety of experts about topics such as psychology, finance, and health. Season 2 focused on more work-related issues, including HR, marketing, and leadership. Now it is time for Season 3. Season 3 is centred on the IT industry, specifically tech startups. There are also career spotlights where I talk to senior IT people about the secrets to their impressive career journeys. My name is Nicola Steel, founder of JJP Talent Solutions, an Australian IT recruitment company. For over 20 years, I've helped tech startups and innovative SMEs to attract, recruit, and retain technical talent. I hope you enjoy listening. I'm delighted to introduce David Davies. David is the founder of AgUnity. AgUnity provides smallholder farmers with the means to lift themselves out of poverty with a smartphone and blockchain solution. Prior to this, David worked in senior technology leadership roles in various investment banks and global consultancies. David, thank you for joining me on Season 3, Episode 14 of the Spotlight series, Don't Just Survive, Thrive.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, David. So tell me a little bit more about your background and your career history.
Okay, so it's really quite diverse. I grew up in a wheat and sheep farming area in very outback South Australia, town with only 4 houses and hour school bus ride.
Wow.
But I gravitated, farming's very marginal in those areas. So I gravitated towards working in technology, actually very innate. I built a kit computer, I would say it was in 1981. Took me a whole year to get it working. Literally soldered the computer together. But then I worked in a variety of technology roles. I left Australia, I'm going to say 94, for Hong Kong. Hong Kong, worked in England for a while. While I was in England, I met a good friend that worked in UNESCO, and he told me how to raise a grant application for UNESCO. So I spent a year in 96, 97 running a UNESCO project in West Africa, where we travelled all around West Africa with a powered paraglider and flew and took film footage and photographs over a lot of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in West Africa. And that really relates to a bit of the origin story of AgUnity, that having spent such a long time in a location like that, you really get to know the challenges of very smallholder farmers. So, we were flying, we drove overland to Timbuktu and flew over Dogon Escarpment and Timbuktu and to Arguin, many amazing places. I got shot at once. I've got a paraglider that's still got two bullet hole patches in it. Yeah, a lot of big adventures. Broke the axle of a vehicle in a minefield. And spent 2 days camped literally in a landmine field. So, Africa was really exciting in those days. And it was just great to spend a year so close to really small villages, because we were driving to places that not a lot of foreigners got to.
Yeah.
And quite often launching the paraglider, which, you would have people walking from, villages 2-3 kilometres away to where you were landing, and you'd take off with not too much ceremony, and you'd come down to thousands of people that had never seen anything like it. So, fantastic adventure.
That's incredible. What did your mum say, though, whilst you're being shot at?
She was kind of used to my adventurous nature by then, and fortunately we hid a lot of the nasty details from her.
I was going to say, and quite different from country South Australia, Hong Kong, London, and then West Africa, and being shot at, and all the various other adventures.
Yeah, breaking down in Castleman's Park and getting circled by hyenas while I carried the paraglider back, and lots of you could write a series of books on that trip, to be honest. And then when I finished that, I was kind of thinking where to go, and I Japan has good paragliding, so if I wanted anywhere else, I just went to Japan, and then ended up running. First, I started working for a company, and then I ran a company. Did a lot of consulting for the big banks, and we made a mobile technology platform. Japan had web browsing mobile phones before anyone else. It was called iMode, created by Docomo, but there was actually 3 competing standards, and none of them worked together. And so we made a middleware product, and then that company got acquired. And then I got hired into Goldman Sachs, who knew me very well, to do a big project. And then I moved downstairs to Lehman. So I ran treasury technology for Lehman Brothers for the crash. Which was a pretty exciting place.
And this was in Japan?
All in Japan, yeah. And then after the Lehman crash, Lehman got bought up by Nomura, and some of my colleagues from Goldman and Lehman hired me in as global head at Standard Chartered Bank in Singapore. So we moved to Singapore, and I worked in there for a while, and started another company that did cost allocation of big budget lines for banks. So we did and then again, that company also got acquired. And in parallel to that, we started working on it's blockchain-like technology, but we were working on a system called Zenect, which is probably best described as a hybrid of a blockchain and something like BitTorrent. It was actually more like eDonkey, but BitTorrent's the one that people know. So a kind of a encrypted two-way communication protocol that was intended to go after the back-end infrastructure of Bloomberg and Reuters, which is an area that really needs an upgrade. And that kind of led into the origin story of AgUnity, that the legal counsel for the company that I had sold in Singapore, he was the partner in that venture. And, it sort of all kicked off by accident from then on.
Goodness me, David, one of my catchphrases is life should never be dull. And I think you certainly live that life. Wow, what a story. And your reason for going to Japan was more about paragliding rather than actually technology.
Yeah, look, the project in Africa just sort of ended because, the funding ran out, and that was the end of the project. So it was like, where in the world do I want to go? And it was almost a case of throwing a dart at a map, and Japan looks nice.
Excellent. I love your approach.
And then I ended up staying there for 12 years. So it was intended to be like a year or two. But, a lot of people find that about Japan. It is a lovely place. I wouldn't stay there with children. It's very, very difficult to bring up kids. And both my children were born in Singapore, which is much, much easier with young kids, but again, not the best place. So one of the things AgUnity allowed us to do was when AgUnity was formed, it was based in Singapore, and then we re-domiciled it to Australia, which is a much better place to run an impact venture, and much better lifestyle, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, Australia is a fantastic place to bring up children. Interestingly, my eldest child, she's all into anime and all that kind of stuff. She wants to go to Japan. She doesn't want to do schoolies. She wants to go to Japan for 2 weeks. She's got it all planned out. The only thing that she hasn't got is any money. So
yeah, that's what parents are for, right?
No, they are not. I said she's got to earn the money for that. So yes, you've got to treat them, make them.
Yeah, make them earn. It's certainly what we had to do growing up in a rural area. I mean, we were working as a kid. At I think about 8 or 9, we were cutting apricots all through the summer holidays, and then that evolved to picking oranges and other stuff. Just
absolutely,
we got a send off, parents.
It's good for you. I definitely make mine earn. Anyway, I'm going a little bit off at a tangent there. So, talking about you did over a decade in investment banking, in senior roles there. So, what attracted you to the startup world?
Oh, I think I was a bit of a misfit in investment banking, to be honest. I came from doing very innovative things in technology, and because I'd done it for quite a while, I'm not really the sort of personality that would normally get hired at an investment bank. I kind of got in despite of that because they'd known I'd founded and exited a company that made some pretty interesting tech. And so one of the guys at Goldman just sort of slipped me in through the back door to do a big project, which actually ended up winning their Global Innovation Award. It was like the only time out of US anyone ever won it. They still use that system. It's called Technology at My Desk. It's how you order anything. You know, if you need a new terminal or something, it's how you get all that stuff in Goldman. And the same system still operates today. So that was that was the move into investment banking. And then when that project won the Innovation Award, they decided it had to move back to US, and they offered me a job in New York, and I said, hell no. And moved down. I moved in the same building, literally 10 floors down to Lehman, almost to the same desk.
Wow.
Yeah, it's maximum irony, and picked up the role of running treasury technology for Lehman just at an opportune time, as so to speak. So that was interesting time. So, sort of, I learned to adapt to the banking environment, but to work in banking requires a very special sort of personality, and most people in banking are risk adverse for very good, particularly in technology. Like you don't, one mistake ends your career. So, I didn't care about the career, so I was happy to do things that could make a mistake, whereas the majority of people in banking will tend to, play a very, very safe line in order to maximize bonuses and career advancement, which is kind of the game you play in banking normally.
So you were like a maverick in investment banking, so to speak.
Very much so, and I was probably lucky enough that I could get away with it by
because you didn't really care. That's why.
I didn't care if I didn't get sacked. Didn't care if I didn't get bonuses, and thereby you do things that others wouldn't necessarily take the risk of doing, and say things that were probably a bit controversial at times because, again, you don't care. And that's the way to get stuff done. And that's a really distinct difference between startup companies and almost any big company. Big companies fail to innovate because even if the company wants to innovate, you have management structures that oppress that sort of revolutionary thinking, and everyone's worried about what might go wrong rather than just push ahead and take the risk and figure out how to fix it.
And that finger pointing and
particularly it's so cutthroat. There's always 5 people vying for a particular promotion, and so it usually goes to the one that kept their head down and remained popular, not necessarily the person that delivered the biggest benefits. And so
I think you've touched on this a little bit, but what would you say as well were the main differences between that corporate world and the startup world?
In the corporate world, you're keeping things rolling. In the startup world, the key is to find a gap and work out how to work out what somebody really, really needs, and get into their head, like understand the problem at a really deep level, and then deliver something that matches that. In a banking environment or a corporate environment, they already know what they want, and you're kind of improving it. More than often, the Goldman Sachs thing was a bit different, right? Because they didn't have a system that did that effectively, and there weren't any on the market. So that was a great opportunity to make something completely original at the time. Now everyone's got that system, but those opportunities don't present themselves very often in big environments. And then when big companies try to do those innovative projects, they're usually very guarded and they over-resource them. They don't do them in the quick, agile, dynamic way that a startup company would. So startup companies actually fill a really vital role in kind of moving the world along, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I actually used to recruit into investment banks back in London in the early 2000s. I loved it at the time. It was exciting. I was young in the city of London. But now I'm not a corporate animal at all. And I love the startup world because it is really about having impact, making a difference. It is much more exciting and things happen much more quickly. And so when you founded AgUnity, what was your real purpose behind that?
Yeah, everyone sort of looks for us trying to do something hugely philanthropic, and it wasn't that at all. It was actually an accident. We actually were doing something that I believe was quite good with the Zinec thing we were building. We were trying to disrupt the banking industry in a way that few people would understand it was very important. And then actually what happened is I got invited to a financial industry conference in London, and I was meant to be in Australia, so I asked John, this other founder, to go along. He turned up. John was living in China, so he's turned up direct off a flight in China, bags in hand, to the conference to pick up his pass, and found out there was a hackathon on the weekend. And then he called me up that evening, and we had a long conversation because the prize was by Singularity University. And for anyone who doesn't know it, Singularity University is the same, Peter Kurzweil, Ray Demandis, the people behind the X Prize, and they like to incubate and foster moonshot stuff. Like, don't do something for 1 million people if you can do it to 1 billion. Think really big, solve a massive world problem, because they can be there. And so we set about trying to win that prize. That was it. We're not looking to change the world. So we, and what we did was really simple. We'd been working in blockchain a bit. We built a blockchain technology from the ground up, so we knew that really well. My previous company in Japan had done something with very early mobile tech phones, and so we had a really good understanding of how mobile, putting functionality in a person's hand can be transformative. But then no one in Africa and developed market had a phone that would do what they needed to do. And then from the time we'd spent in Africa, and from my history growing up in a farming area, we saw the vast difference that in Australia, even the biggest farms work as part of cooperatives and work with other farmers, and we have Wool Board, and we have all these organisations that help us. African farmers have, particularly the very small ones, they typically have nothing. They're doing everything by themselves. If they have to sell goods, that's taking, and a lot of farmers are women. So you've got women taking bags of produce into town, leaving the kids back at the farm, getting a poor price because they're competing with everyone else. If they want to buy inputs for the farm, how do you buy 2 kilograms of fertilizer? You're getting bad, all the mechanics of a small farmer are just wrong. So the concept was really simple. It was just, we'll use blockchain technology to make sure the transactions are secure. We'll get cheap mobile phones, and we'll do an app that just is essentially basic record keeping. And by improving record keeping between farmers, we can get them to trust each other and cooperate. And those are the two most important words in any developing market. If people trust and cooperate, most of their own problems, they'll solve themselves. If you get over those things, the rest, one of the things I often say, and I'm always embarrassed to say it, is that in a developed market, we've got to realise that some of these people we work with, they'd be doctors or lawyers or bankers if they grew up in a different place. They're just as smart as us. They know their environment way better. And if you take away the barrier of having to survive to fight to survive every day, they can easily figure out, how we can share resources to get a tractor, how we can farm better, how we can get rid of the pests in the crops. Problem is, while they're struggling and they're so close to the breadline, they won't be able to achieve those things. So the AgUnity app was really simple. What it does often goes over the heads of a Western audience. We just basic record keeping, improving trust, cooperation, then we do a bunch of other stuff beyond that. And we presented that idea at the conference, and we won that prize. And then Costa Peric, who ran financial inclusion for Gates Foundation, he was in the audience, and he beelined over to John. And if I quote it correctly, it was like, we see this problem all over the world. You guys just nailed it. Really want you to take it seriously. If you need help, we'll come to us and we'll ask. We haven't yet actually done a project with Gates Foundation. They were that inspiration, and then we've worked with a lot of other development banks and other organisations, and I think currently there's a grant with Gates Foundation, and we've got maybe 5 or 6 submissions our partners have actually submitted applications involving us to this grant. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure finally 5 years later we'll actually do a project with Gates, but it was their inspiration, and he was so emphatic. Look, in the case, and we hear this story from a lot of NGOs, they'll go into an area, they'll be doing some farming improvements, they'll have it work really well, but ultimately the NGO has to step back.
Yeah.
You have to let the farmers run it themselves. And Costa said, look, you can't tell you the number of times we've done that, and 2 weeks later it's all fallen apart. And it'll often be the simple thing, like someone's got the wrong price for something, or someone's accidentally paid someone wrong, or they felt that it was something different. And that largely comes down to just them not having any non-paper, reliable way of recording what's going on. As soon as they have that, all the wishy-washy nature comes out of the transactions. Everything's clear. I handed you 3 bags of cocoa beans. They were worth this much, so you'll pay me the right price. Once that happens, things run much, much smoother, and you have this collaborative group of farmers so they can get the benefits of scale and start to be essentially competitive with the bigger farms. And that's really the big issue for, and the number is outstanding. There's 500 million farming families around the world, representing a bit over 2 billion people. And the people in their supply chains and working on those farms, it comes to about 3.1 billion people. So 40% of the world population is that demographic that lives on a small farm, relies on agriculture, doesn't have a phone mostly, doesn't have a bank account, and really doesn't collaborate properly with others. And that's the market we're addressing, which, going back to the origin story, exactly hit what Singularity we're trying to promote. Do something can impact 1 billion people.
Fantastic. So I thought you'd be some big, I can't speak today, philanthropist is what I'm trying to say, which I think probably at your heart you are, but you'd actually gone to win the prize. So it was almost the glory that led to that as well.
Well, it was trying to win the prize because we're inherently competitive. Most Australians are. But then during the course of the weekend, even before we spoke to Gates Foundation, we were getting feedback from 2 cooperatives, one in South Africa and one in India, and they were giving us really strong opinions that this was actually valuable. So before even Gates Foundation and UNICEF, actually, a lady from UNICEF came along with Gates Foundation and said exactly the same thing. And then in the subsequent weeks, we spoke to Asia Development Bank and IFC and a few others, and they all pretty much came with the same story, that you really need to have the farmers connected, and a standard out-of-the-box phone does nothing for a developing world farmer. That, relying on them to get their own apps, you really have to set it up for them. And so everyone was reinforcing that we were on a right track. But again, and then this kind of goes back to what I said before, like the big distinction is you've got to look to what is a really big problem and try to solve that problem. So AgUnity at its heart is a problem-solving company. We believe it's best to do that commercially, because if we're commercially viable, we can scale infinitely. And treating it like a company with objectives and commercial incentive is very important. And even the non-profit NGOs, they love that. The fact that we believe we can scale. But then, really the motivation comes from, we go out into the villages a lot pre-COVID. My kids love this year because I've been home for a year now, and previously I was on international flights twice a month. And all our management team have been on the farms, and you just get the most heartwarming responses from the farmers. They love the fact that someone's listened to them and built something that actually addresses their real need, because you wouldn't be surprised how many people come to them with technologies and solutions without really consulting with the farmers and without really hitting their true need. And I think that's what's unique about AgUnity. We've worked for 5 years now, and the other thing so John, this partner, he was a lawyer, and the first thing we did was, and I'd recommend this to any startup, the first thing you do when you start a company is take your lawyer and send them to the farthest end of the world to live in the jungle with farmers. It's so effective. Gets them out of your hair. So he lived in a house with no proper floor and showering under a hose for a year in Kenya. He really got close to the farmers, and that's how we designed the first application, which wasn't very good, but that set us on the right path, and it got the right manner of spending time with the farmers, understanding them. Then you'll get the solution right. And even a lot of the startup companies in the developing world, the people that are building those don't really get close enough to the farmers or spend time with them. They're often building solutions that we'd be more comfortable with than farmers would.
So it's really understanding your customers and getting your lawyer furthest away you can.
Yeah, you get the lawyer to the jungle. That's the first thing to do.
Great tip there. Thanks, David. So in terms of your core values there at AgUnity, how's that really driven the culture?
Yeah, I mean, and that's been huge in part of our recruitment. And we have, a couple of our people hail from very senior roles in investment banking where they were earning 3 to 4 times what we pay. And we have a culture that we're doing something really big and important for. And one of the distinctions that we've kept true to that is really hard to do, it would be so much easier for us to make a lot more money if we pandered a bit more to the big commodity buyers and became a bigger farmer solution. And that would be a horrible thing to do because we've seen there's a few solutions that are a bit like us that are a little bit more complicated, a little bit more geared to slightly bigger farmers, and that creates a very terrible situation that you have the farmers that can use their solution and then the ones that don't. And it creates more of an income disparity because if you're not able to organise, you can't sell to the bigger buyers, you can't get the good prices that the slightly bigger farmers are getting, and those smaller farmers end up selling to them at a lower price than they would have otherwise got. So we've really concentrated hard on addressing that 500 million user market of the very smallest, lowest income farmers in the world and just trying to level the playing field. And I think if we do that effectively, we're actually tapping into the biggest unaddressed market in the world.
Fantastic.
But it's not easy.
Well, that was my next question, actually. So what have been the main challenges with AgUnity when you first started and as the company's grown?
Yes, I mean, we had to learn a lot of stuff on the way, and none of this is intuitive. None of it you pick up on the way. So we did what a lot of other companies did at first, and we developed a downloadable app, and we tried to get farmers to install it. And, you wouldn't believe the phones they come with if they source themselves. And then we realized very quickly that it was costing us more to get the farmers set up with an app on their own phone and make sure they updated it and deal with password issues. Then we decided, well, we can get phones out of China for $20 now if we buy them in bulk. And they're actually really, like nowadays you get a iPhone 6 equivalent phone for $20 you bought in bulk. And it's a really good phone. So we thought, well, I could get him this download thing. We'll just give him the phone. And then that allowed us, that was really a game changer. There's quite a distinct difference to what we do. And very interestingly, once we started doing that, we found that the price of the phone wasn't a barrier at all. And we ended up moving to a fully waterproof IP68 shockproof phone that costs about $50. And again, you get now an iPhone 7 equivalent phone for $50 you can drop it in the mud. It doesn't matter. It's a very high-end phone. The farmers love it. They think it's Christmas because in somewhere like Ethiopia, that phone would cost them $200. And we get them in with, say, World Food Programme's assistance, and the farmers pay it off over a couple of seasons. They think it's an awesome deal just to get the phone. But more importantly, because we control the phone, we can do things that people with an app or a normal phone just can't. So we clean up and change a few things in the operating system so we can make the phones so they when farmers do transactions, they do it farmer to cooperative or farmer to buyer or farmer to farmer using QR codes. Mm-hmm. And we can actually use NFC. It's got it on the phone. But the QR codes, again, it's another subtle thing that the farmers feel like information is going back and forward, so they trust the system. If you do it with NFC, then it's a little bit mysterious, and they're not so comfortable with it happening. And so the phones quite often work offline all the time. So the farmers won't have signal, or they won't have updated their data plan, and they can do transactions, and the transactions go to both the phones. They're highly encrypted, and when they get signal, it'll essentially clear out the queue of all the transactions. And normal phones just can't work that way. And a normal phone, normal phones, when they come out of the box, they have so much junk on them that they use up the data plan for all sorts of useless stuff. We can limit that and prioritize our transactions on the bandwidth. We can lock the phone if the farmer loses it, or if the cooperative needs to recover it, and things like that. And very importantly, if we're starting to integrate banking and training and or insurance systems and others, because the phone is highly secure and the platform is highly secure, we don't need the farmer to have multiple passwords. It's got a security key on the phone. The farmer has one password for the phone, and everything else can essentially be open under that, because we've locked their identity to it, and we know there can, because of our system, there can be no man-on-the-middle tax or anything like that. So it creates a highly important thing. So we did a lot on the phone, and then we also had to create a user experience which doesn't act like one for developed market. We were a part of an NGO accelerator in Europe, and they brought in the Google user experience experts, and we had to very politely tell the NGO to tell the Google guys to back off, because they hadn't been in a developed country and they didn't really understand farmers, and they were trying to get us to redesign the app in a modern way. And that's not really what you require. Our interface relies on, big geometric shapes, primary colors, no words. Every screen, it does only one concept. So it's, what are you doing? Dropping off a crop. What crop are you dropping off? How much are you dropping off? Who's your counterparty? So that someone who's never had a phone before can just pick it up and it follows along. Whereas we're used to things like an Uber app where we say, I want a phone, I want this much, I want it here. We're used to that complexity. But if you put that in the hands of someone who's never had a phone before, you've got a whole lot of training and uptake issues, and you're worried about language and other things. So we've made a very simple user experience, and we've refined that and refined it over 5 years now, to the point where, quite often you can give this to, say, a farmer in the highlands of New Guinea that never went to school, never touched a phone before, and 10 minutes later they've got the basic functions. It's like, oh yeah, green triangle, got it, working well.
Absolutely. So you're not overwhelming them with too much information and graphics and everything.
Yeah. And then the other advantage of, because we control the phones, we can update it. And so you don't have to worry about farmers updating, but we also start the phone out with really three basic functions. Like, I've got some crop and I need someone to pick it up. I'm handing over the crop and I'm getting my payment. Nothing. Yeah. So, and they get that. Like, that's what they do every day. So it's very much in tune with what the farmer's used to. And then we can add a training applet, and then we can add a marketplace applet, and then we can add now you can move some money into a banking app, or you can add some insurance. So we can slowly take them on a pathway to more and more advanced services and financial inclusion and other things.
Awesome. That's brilliant. And so AgUnity, it's a smartphone solution, but also a blockchain solution. On a more general scale, general perspective, how do you think blockchain can be a force for good? And what potential do you think it has to do bad as well?
Yeah, so again, a lot of people, particularly going back a couple of years, a lot of people perceive blockchain as this, something like cold fusion. It's just a technology. It's not that revolutionary as people made it out to be. And it's only one component of what we do. And we use it for a very specific purpose. It's just to make an immutable record of the transaction. So if farmer hands over cocoa beans to the cooperative, nobody can ever say that didn't happen. And if there was a mistake, we just do an amended record like you do in an accounting system. So we don't use it for anything more elaborate than that at this time. There's a few things in the works that'll expand that. But so we use it in a very simple way. And that having a confirmed ledger of trust where there's no single party they have to rely on, that's extremely important in the developed world, in what we do, in also things like artisanal mining, in refugee camps. So there's World Food Programme has probably, we know them very well, so we know that they have dozens of initiatives like this where they've used blockchain very, very effectively. And I've got a huge respect for their team in Munich, because they really do get not using it because it's blockchain, but understanding where trust and clear records and not having middlemen makes a whole lot of sense. So that's the really good side of blockchain. Where it's potentially dangerous is when you get into digital currencies that lack traceability. There's a lot of problems with corruption and money laundering, and one of the issues that we continually see is, this is digressing a bit, but one of the things that we see in a lot of countries is the credit that is, if something happens badly for a farmer, and they're a small farmer, they have almost no access to credit. And if they do, it's at sort of 30%, if they're lucky, more likely to be 50 to 100% interest rates from very unsavory people. And USAID actually identified that this is the primary cause of human trafficking. Essentially, farmer gets into debt, it's with loan sharks, it's constructed in a way that he'll never pay off that debt, and ultimately the daughter goes into slavery because that was the intention all along. So it's a tragic thing, and it's very, very hard to address that without having a line of communication with farmers. So one of the things we're hoping to do is just give them some moderately affordable line of credit, which can be achieved, but that's a really good blockchain use case, but that could also be horribly abused. You could expose farmers to tokens that had appreciation of the currency and their debt ended up spiraling. So we've seen a few systems like that where people haven't understood the problem well enough and are ramming in a solution that might work in a developed market that creates a lot of risks for farmers and also exposes them to money laundering and a lot of other minor issues. So that's what I'd see. In the token area, you have to be super careful, and also in the financing across blockchain, the peer-to-peer financing is got probably one of the greatest potentials for leveling the playing field for very small farmers, just giving them affordable credit, because credit's dangerous in its own right. Coming from banking, I feel I can say this. Getting in too much debt is dangerous, but you can never avoid the potential of that. The cow dies, you have to do something, or you have to pay some bill, or there's a typhoon wiped out the crop this year. There are situations where you have to be able to keep yourself viable, and credit's the right way to do that, but it needs to be structured so those people can pay it back. One of the things I saw a lot of in investment banking is, particularly after GFC, there was so much cheap money around, and the bigger companies could borrow at next to nothing, buy up land from smallholder farmers, turn it to something like a palm oil plantation, which isn't really, it's terrible land use, right? It's a terribly low land use. But the farmers, because the farmers couldn't get any sort of credit, they had no defense of that. If they get into better debt, they were selling the land.
Yeah.
And one of the big, unless we want the whole developing world to turn into palm oil plantations, then we need to make credit and financial services available to the farmers, not because we want to put them in debt, but just because otherwise they're not competitive with the companies that will snap up their land.
Absolutely. And actually, talking about crises, so you've obviously got the GFC. What impacts COVID had on the farmers in terms of credit or just general farming and what have you?
I don't think we've seen the full extent of it yet, because it's, now we've got COVID variants in Brazil that are fundamentally different. So I think there's more waves to come, and it'll take a long time to get the developing world vaccinated. So interestingly, we were actually very early on, we were producing, as a philanthropic measure, big banners that we were putting up talking about social distancing and how to make masks from T-shirts and a whole range of things. And one of the great things we found, Ethiopia is the greatest example of this. People were so good about picking up social distancing and all wearing masks and all being careful about reducing their travel and things. You know, none of this, it's my right, I don't want to do this. Right? It's like, it's a disease, we'll do what we have to avoid. So I thought places like Ethiopia would have been devastated, and comparing Ethiopia to Indonesia is quite interesting because they got so less hit, and based on the demographics and vitamin D issues and things, they should have been worse. And I think they just had very good behaviour. And a lot of African countries who have familiarity with malaria and dengue and cholera and Ebola, they get it. It's a disease. You're going to go through some hardship for a year or so. You're better off to just do it and get rid of the disease. So it's very, very practical behaviour in a few of those countries. And you see some of the more developed countries that didn't act as well for very selfish, short-sighted measures. So that said, I'm horrendously worried about the informal food systems. And that's one of the things we do try to work on, is keep the food supplies working. And what AgUnity does is quite critical to that, because farmers can indicate they've got it. We're doing a big project with CASA in Uganda. CASA's funded by, used to be called DFID in the UK, but equivalent of DFAT in Australia. And we're reaching 10,000 farmers in Uganda with that project, just as a means for them to sell their crop without having to walk into the town. Little thing, but hugely impactful, because if you can isolate, stop a little bit of that movement, you can keep the villages a bit protected. And just everything you can do with COVID, a 20% reduction in the spread makes a huge difference, because you're keeping the RT down to a level which they can manage long enough for the vaccine to come in.
Absolutely, definitely. And it's good that people reacted saying, look, this is a pandemic. It's not about our rights so much. We've got to do this. So finally, just a few questions more about your career. What would you say have been the main highlights and the main challenges over your career, David?
Oh, well, I'd say a big challenge is, and this should apply to anyone. I mean, obviously in investment banking you earn tons of money, but it's not really a rewarding career. And I would say the career challenge for anyone is finding something that they fit. And I'm not only going to speak for myself, but I'm going to speak for our entire executive team. I think with AgUnity, they've all found somewhere they fit better than anywhere, because we're making real impact. We're scaling the business well. We're doing something important, and we're using the creativity and innovation. We're using all our best skills for something that's really good, and hopefully we will eventually be into the tens or hopefully hundreds of millions of farmers and doing something really big and impactful for the world. And I think that's the key to any career. Like, I didn't fit in investment bank, I didn't fit in the other things I'm doing. And most people can go through life with never finding something that they really fully utilize their potential in. And when you do that, it doesn't matter what you're learning, right? Nobody needs a $500,000 salary, really. We could all live very comfortably on a good enough salary. And the most important thing, I think, with any career is when your grandchildren hear what your grandfather did, you want them to go, that was awesome. And, I was an MD at an investment bank. Yeah. So what?
He earned a lot of money. So would you say that would be the biggest secret behind your success? Finding your place, making an impact.
Yeah, and well, two things. Finding that thing, which requires the listening to customers, not being egotistical about what you're doing, pivoting a lot of times. Like we've been down tracks and we go, yeah, that's wrong, move it. So steering yourself to doing something that's actually being effective and has got the right story. And then as a CEO, or as the founder leader, making sure that the company all understands that vision. Like you have to go and keep reiterating what we're doing is so important, it's so critical. And that's as much for yourself as the rest of the team. Did you know what you're doing as well? If you do that, life's great.
That's fantastic. And one last question. If you could turn back the clock, David, would you do anything differently?
Oh, not with AgUnity. I mean, I probably would have been working with something like AgUnity a bit earlier because, but on the other hand, I think all your experiences lead up to what you are. And if you take out any of those experiences, good or bad, you don't have the same perception. So it's really hard to rethink history in that respect. So I think the right answer is no. I think you don't know what micro effect working in a different industry could have had 10 years ago. One of the interesting things, like why AgUnity is so unique, is we have a few people from development experiences, like Petra ran one of the biggest NGOs in Indonesia. So we have people from that experience. We have people from environment and farming backgrounds, but we also have technology and banking people that normally wouldn't gravitate to this business. And it's those skills that enables us to do things that clearly, the NGOs that are, NGOs and the commodity buyers that are our customers, we have two customers. We have the farmers are our customers, but we have to make our system deliver results for it. Development banks, for commodity buyers like fair trade, for banks and financial institutions. And because we bridge those two worlds, we're able to do that very effectively. And I think it's only because we have that experience in banking and we have that high-end technology and management experience that we can achieve that, because it's very clear that organizations like, I won't name them, but some of the really big development organizations, they just can't do it. Like it's not that hard, but they haven't got the experience that puts them in that position to do that. So, I think you wouldn't turn back the clock on anyone, because it's the unique and diverse skill set we have in AgUnity that allows us to be, modestly very good at what we do.
Absolutely. And talking, I guess, because you've worked in those banking environments, financial environments, you can talk their language as well to get that right outcome from them. Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights, David. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Oh, look, no, it's been an absolute pleasure. And just the minor plug that, we are always looking, we're rapidly growing the team. We grew, I think we're 5 years, and we just cracked 50 people in the last week or so. And right now we're in a sort of booming market. So if there's anyone that wants to be involved or help out in any way, then please do reach out to us, because we've got way too much work and projects on than we can ever cope. And we're looking for people and, partners and support and something like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Have you got a careers page? I can put that in.
We do, and we got tons of job roles on it. And, and we very, very carefully look for people that fit our culture more than anything else. Experience is secondary to culture, in that their heart has to be in the right place, because if that is, then they'll fit in the company, and we'll make way for people that don't have the right skill sets if they're a philosophical fit for what we do.
Love it. That's brilliant. And I'll put the career page on the show notes as well. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much. Been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're looking for career advice, your next career opportunity, or to grow your tech team, then please call me, Nicola Steel, on 0499 773 546, or go to our website, jjptalent.com.au. The Don't Just Survive, Thrive podcast is part of the Spotlight series, which includes the YouTube channel Spotlight on Software Development. If you want more insights into the software industry, particularly tech startups, then subscribe to the Spotlight on Software Development YouTube channel. Thank you for listening. Until next time.